Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I know it's been a while, but here I am again. And today let's talk about how we often talk about Generation N traits as if they belong exclusively to younger people. I'm talking about when we talk about Gen Z being so many things. It's almost as if a certain generation suddenly woke up one morning and collectively decided to be anxious or distracted, entitled, fragile, or emotionally volatile. But when you step back and look carefully, what we are really observing is not a personality flaw that is restricted to one generation. What I believe we are witnessing is a shift in the emotional climate of society itself. These traits are not confined to age groups, they're present, increasingly present across the entire population. You think older adults don't scroll endlessly through news feeds and reels? Only Gen Z does? Professionals are struggling with attention and burnout and emotional fatigue. Parents are also feeling overwhelmed and reactive. They've always felt overwhelmed, especially new parents. And the behaviors that we associate with younger generations are showing up everywhere because the conditions that produce those behaviors exist everywhere. This is not really as much about who you are born as and more about the environment you're living inside. Which brings us to a slightly uncomfortable question. If these patterns are widespread, where did the conditions come from? The world that younger people are inheriting was shaped by the stacking of decisions we have made over decades. Economic models that reward constant productivity, technology which has been designed around attention capture rather than well being, education systems that are built for compliance rather than emotional resilience. There are these cultural narratives that glorify hustle and comparison and external validation, and none of these appeared by accident. They were built, we built them, normalized and maintained by previous generations with good intentions mostly, but the consequences are now becoming visible. And then when we mock younger people for struggling inside this environment, we are basically criticizing the outcomes of systems that we helped to create. And there I'm being kind by saying helped. And this is where projection enters a picture. It is psychologically so much easier to label the next generation as weak rather than admit that so many of us are also tired, overstimulated, uncertain, and emotionally stretched. So we defend it with mockery. Mockery becomes a defense. It protects identity and it helps us avoid responsibility. There's one more layer here. What we call fragility is so much of the time just a lower tolerance for emotional discomfort in what is rapidly becoming and staying a high stimulation world. We say entitlement so much, and what we call entitlement is so much of the time just a reaction to unstable job markets and safety nets that are constantly shrinking, even families not really available to everyone as much as they were before. We use the word short attention span so often, but these are so frequently nervous systems that are adapted to constant alerts and notifications and reward loops that are controlled by algorithms. We call them moral failures, but they're really adaptive responses to persistent pressure. Now, this doesn't mean that personal responsibility disappears. It simply means that responsibility becomes shared rather than being dumped onto one age group. Systems shape behavior, but we still make choices. Parents do shape emotional models. You can't just blame the generation for that. What about our actions? As parents, as leaders, leaders shape organizational culture, consumers shape demand, teachers shape expectations. Each layer populated by us has contributed to the emotional tone of society that we see today. Suppose we replace blaming generations with introspection, you might find something interesting happens. The conversation shifts. We no longer ask what is wrong with them. The question then becomes, what have we collectively built? What has been our contribution to this, the prevailing state that we're seeing today? A state of the way of being, not only of the next generation, but also us? This is a much more useful question. It opens a space for practical change rather than emotional venting. It might allow us to change how we work, how we parent, how we use technology, how we measure success, and how we teach emotional resilience. I don't think we do, but maybe we'll start. Generations aren't rivals, they're links in a chain. Each link doesn't just inherit wealth and infrastructure, it also inherits emotional patterns, coping strategies, blind spots, and cultural habits. If we want different outcomes in younger people, the work doesn't start with criticism. It starts with self examination, introspection. We have to look at ourselves. Suppose I said the real shift needed is not in the behavior of the next generation, but in the emotional maturity of the current one. We need to change. When we take responsibility for the conditions we have created, we have helping to sustain, then we might just stop reacting and start repairing. What do you think? And that may be the most generationally transformative act available to us right now. I'd love to hear what you think. Please do share comments, and I'll see you next time.